Hello, my name is Valeria. This is my new original story on my channel. Subscribe and enjoy.
The Alpha King ordered her execution. She survived. Now she's his new maid, and he doesn't recognize her. 3 years ago, King Evander signed a death warrant. He did not look at the woman's face when he did it. He was told she had conspired with enemy wolves to put a blade in his back. He was told the evidence was undeniable. He was told she had never loved him at all, that their bond had been a strategy, not a truth. He signed the order at dawn, and he did not watch it carried out. He believed what he was told because the alternative was too devastating to survive. That is the thing about grief. It will take almost any lie you offer it, if the lie is easier than the truth. Now a new maid has been assigned to the king's private chambers. She keeps her eyes down. She does not speak unless spoken to. Her hands are scarred across the wrists, and she moves through the palace like a woman who has learned that the safest thing in the world is to go unnoticed. The king passes her in the corridor every morning and does not look at her face. His wolf does, though. His wolf has been going quiet and strange, in a way Evander cannot explain, stopping in its tracks every time she is near, pressing its nose toward a scent it should not recognize. She smells like something that has been lost. He tells himself it means nothing. He is wrong. And before this story is over, the king who signed her death warrant will learn two things at once. She is alive, and someone used his hand to almost destroy her. Chapter 1. The Wrong Woman. The corridor outside the king's chambers was the longest walk Sarah took every morning. 43 steps from the servants' stairwell to the heavy oak door at the far end. She had counted them without meaning to, on her third morning in the north wing, the way a person counts things when they are trying very hard not to think. She thought anyway. She always did. This morning the torches were still burning low, the night shift not yet extinguished, and the light they threw against the stone walls was amber and unsteady. Sarah kept her gaze on the floor in front of her and walked the way she always walked, quietly, deliberately, taking up as little space as possible. She was carrying a tray with the king's morning tea. She had not spilled it once in 6 weeks of service, which was a point of private pride she allowed herself, because there was very little else to be proud of. The head housekeeper, a severe woman named Olena, who had apparently been running the palace domestic staff since before the current king was born, had assigned her to the north wing without comment. Olena assigned people where she needed them. She did not explain herself. Sarah had kept her head down, done her work, and asked for nothing. This was the shape of her life now, and she was grateful for it. She told herself that every morning. The oak door was ahead. Sarah shifted the tray, balanced it on one forearm, raised her knuckles, and knocked twice. Silence. She knocked again. "Come in." The voice was low, unhurried, faintly irritated in the way of a man who had not yet finished deciding whether he wanted to be awake. Sarah pushed the door open with her shoulder and stepped through. The king's chambers were large and spare, the way rooms belonging to men who do not allow themselves comfort always are. High ceilings, stone walls, a fire burned down to coals in the hearth. The windows faced east, and the early light came through them gray and flat, not yet risen enough to warm anything. King Evander was at the writing desk. He had his back to her. He was reading something, papers spread across the surface in front of him, and he did not turn when she entered. Sarah crossed to the side table and set the tray down, poured the tea, and turned to leave. "Leave the window covering open," he said, without looking up. "Yes, Your Majesty." She reached the window nearest the desk and drew the heavy drape back. The gray morning light flooded in and fell across the papers, across his hands where they rested on the desk. She was already moving away when he said, still without looking up, "You are new." Sarah stopped. 6 weeks, Your Majesty. Before that, general service. She kept her voice level. I transferred from the South Wing. He made a small sound that was not quite acknowledgement and not quite dismissal. His pen moved across the paper. She walked to the door. She was almost through it when his wolf stirred. She felt it the way you feel weather coming before the sky changes. A shift in the pressure of the room. Something large and ancient going very still. She did not look back. She kept walking. She pulled the door shut behind her with careful, deliberate quiet. In the corridor, she set her back against the cool stone and breathed. That was nothing, she told herself. That was nothing. She walked back down the 43 steps to the servants' stairwell, and she did not count them. She was too busy convincing herself that the thing she had felt in that room was ordinary, that it meant nothing, that his wolf had gone still the moment she moved toward the door, that it meant nothing, that her own hands, which she had trained over 3 years of careful, deliberate practice to stay steady at all times, had shaken very slightly on the door handle. She had survived worse. She had survived things that should have killed her. This was a corridor, a tray of tea, a man at a desk who had not even looked at her face. She was fine. She went down the stairs and started on the rest of her morning rounds, and she was almost convincing herself it was true. The palace had a rhythm, like all large households, and Sarah had spent 6 weeks learning it, the way she learned everything now. Carefully, quietly, without drawing attention. She knew which corridors were busy at which hours. She knew which senior staff to avoid, and which ones were indifferent enough to leave her alone. She knew where the kitchens were warmest in the evening, and which of the upper servants left their dinner plates outside the door for collection. She did not know very much about herself. This was the part she had stopped fighting. 3 years ago, she had woken up on a muddy riverbank at the edge of the eastern forest, with river water in her lungs and nothing in her head. Not her name, not her history, not a single face or voice or place to anchor herself to. Only the instinct, immediate and overwhelming, that she must not be found, that whoever she was, wherever she had been running from something terrible. She had a name, eventually. She had found it in the first few days, surfacing out of nowhere like a word remembered on the edge of sleep. Sarah. That was what she was called. She could not have said by whom. She had scars on both wrists, the kind that come from rope. She had a mating mark on her shoulder, faded nearly to nothing, the way a bond mark fades when a mate dies. She had covered it from the first day, and she had not uncovered it since. The rest of herself remained largely a mystery, and she had made a kind of peace with that. She had built a small, functional life in the 3 years since the river. She had found work. She had learned to be useful and invisible in the way that useful, invisible people are kept on without question. She had made her way to the capital, to the palace, not because she remembered anything about it, but because something in her had pointed this direction with the quiet certainty of a compass finding north. She had followed it. She tried, most of the time, not to ask herself why. The only person in the palace who had spoken to Sarah with anything approaching genuine interest was a young woman named Bet, who worked the linen rooms and had the particular gift of being simultaneously kind and entirely uninterested in other people's histories. "You're the one in the north wing now," Bet said one evening, settling beside Sarah in the servants' dining hall, with the ease of someone who had already decided they were going to be friendly and saw no reason to make a production of it. "How is it?" "Quiet," Sarah said. "That's what they all say, first," Bet told her cheerfully. "Then they say strange. Then they ask to be reassigned." Sarah looked at her. Bet shrugged. "The king's wolf has been off for years. Everyone in the north wing feels it eventually. Like the air's different up there. Heavier." She tilted her head. "Does not bother you?" "No," Sarah said honestly. Bet studied her for a moment with sharp, curious eyes, and then smiled. "Fair enough. You seem like someone it wouldn't bother." Sarah let that pass without comment. "What happened to the maid before me?" she asked instead. Bet's expression shifted slightly, not toward alarm, but toward the particular careful neutrality of someone choosing their words. "She said she kept dreaming about the old queen," Bet said. "Said the king's wolf would fix on her, and she would dream about a woman with gold hair sitting in a room full of candles. It disturbed her. She asked to go back to the east wing." Sarah picked up her cup and drank. "The old queen," she said. "Queen Seraphine." Bet's voice dropped slightly, the way voices drop around grief that has been present long enough to become ordinary. "She died 3 years ago. The king had her executed for treason. There was a trial." She paused. "Most people here think he was wrong. They don't say so, but you can tell." Sarah set the cup down. "What do they think happened?" "They think someone else put that evidence together," Bet said. "They think she was innocent, and someone wanted her gone, and the king believed the wrong person." She said it simply, without drama, the way things are said when they have been thought for a very long time. Sarah looked at the far wall. "And the king?" she asked. "Does he think the same?" Bet was quiet for a moment. "He has been different since she died," she said finally. "Not sad, exactly. The way a man is when the grief has gone inward so deep. It has changed the shape of things. The beta says he hasn't slept a full night in 3 years. She glanced at Sarah. "The North Wing maids always end up knowing more about the king than anyone else. That is the other reason they ask for reassignment." Sarah said nothing. She thought about the shift in that room this morning, the weight of the air, the sound of the wolf going still. She thought about her wrists and the mark on her shoulder. She thought about the name she did not know and the face she could not remember. She went to bed that night, and she did not sleep. Chapter 2. What she remembers. She started dreaming 3 nights after her first morning in the king's chambers. The first dream was a room. Stone walls, high ceiling, candles everywhere, dozens of them. The kind of abundance that meant someone had wanted the dark, pushed entirely back. A fire large enough to heat the whole space. And sitting in the chair, nearest the fire, wrapped in something dark. A woman with her hands in her lap, and her head turned slightly to the side. The woman's face was unclear in the dream, the way faces are sometimes. Not blurred exactly, but present in a way that did not resolve into features. Sarah could feel that the woman was young, that she was afraid, that she was sitting with the precise stillness of someone who has decided not to show the thing eating her alive. The dream shifted. A corridor. Night. Someone running. Then river water. Then nothing. Sarah woke at dawn, with her heart hammering and a taste in her mouth that she could not identify. She lay still for a long time in the dark of her small room in the servants' quarters, and she held very carefully to the discipline she had built over 3 years. The discipline that said, "You do not know what these dreams mean. You do not have enough information to interpret them. You will not reach a conclusion before you have the evidence to support it." Then she got up, collected the king's morning tray, and walked the 43 steps. The second dream came the following night. This time there was a man in it. She could not see his face clearly either, only the shape of him, broad across the shoulders, the particular way he stood that spoke of a person who has been in authority so long they have stopped noticing it is there. He was standing at a window. It was dawn outside. His hands were resting flat on the window ledge, and his whole body had the rigid, locked stillness of someone refusing to allow themselves to move. There was a paper on the desk behind him. In the dream, Sarah tried to see what the paper said, and could not get close enough. She woke before she reached it. She lay in the dark and told herself, "This is nothing. These are ordinary dreams. The north wing affects the staff because the king's wolf has been dysregulated for 3 years, and the emotional charge of a powerful alpha wolf bleeds into the air of the spaces around him." She had heard this explained plainly by the head housekeeper in her first week. It was not supernatural. It was simply the nature of a large, grief-damaged wolf in a confined space. She believed this. She believed it less after the third night. The third dream was different. It was not a room or a corridor. It was nothing so coherent. It was only a feeling. The feeling was of being held, not gently, not softly, held the way a person holds something they are terrified to lose. Both arms, pressed close, the kind of grip that is not quite an embrace, and is far past one. Someone's heart hammering against her ear, someone's breath uneven and ragged in a way that was not composure, not control, not anything a king was supposed to permit himself. A voice, very low, saying her name. Saying it the way a prayer is said, not performing it for anyone, just the word itself, offered up, because there was nowhere else to put it. Saying Seraphine. Sarah came awake, sitting upright in the dark of her room, with both hands pressed hard to her chest, and her whole body shaking. She sat there for a long time. She thought about the faded mark on her shoulder. She thought about the scars on her wrists. She thought about the name she had found on the edge of sleep 3 years ago on a riverbank. Sarah. Seraphine. The part of her that had built itself up on discipline and deliberate unknowing said, "Stop. You do not know. You have no evidence. You will not reach this conclusion." The part of her that had been pointing at this palace like a compass pointing north said nothing at all. It had already arrived. She did not ask to be reassigned. She thought about it. She thought about it carefully, the way she thought about everything, laying out the arguments on both sides with a methodical precision that had become, over 3 years, her closest substitute for the self she could not remember. The argument for leaving was clear. If she was who the dreams suggested she might be, this palace was the most dangerous place on the continent for her. The king had believed she was a traitor. The king had signed the order. If he recognized her, she would not survive the night. The argument for staying was harder to articulate, but no less insistent. She was already here. Something had brought her here, through 3 years of careful survival, through every decision she had made in the absence of knowing who she was. Something in her had pointed at this palace, and she had followed it. She did not believe that was coincidence. She did not know what she believed it was. And there was the wolf. She thought about the wolf. A powerful alpha's wolf did not simply go still around a stranger. That was not how it worked. She understood this the way she understood certain things. Not from memory, but from the bedrock of knowledge that had survived the river when nothing else did. A wolf went still and strange around scent it recognized, at a level below thought, below language, below reason, around something that belonged to it. She did not leave the north wing. She counted her 43 steps every morning. She set the tray on the side table. She poured the tea. She kept her eyes down and her voice level, and she did not let the king look at her face. She was not ready for that yet. She was not sure she would ever be ready for that. She was buying time, she told herself, gathering evidence, being careful. She was also, underneath all of that, doing something she had not done in 3 years. She was hoping. She had been so careful, for so long, to want nothing that could be taken, to build her small, functional life out of materials that could not be confiscated. She had been so disciplined about hope, so thorough in her management of it. And now, in the north wing of the palace, where her name lived in other people's mouths, as a woman 3 years dead, she was letting it back in. She was terrified. She did the morning rounds, and kept her face still, and did not let it show. There was a morning, in the 5th week, when the king did not stay at his desk. He was standing at the east window when she came in, looking out at the training yard below. He had his arms crossed and his shoulders set in the way they always were, and he did not turn when the door opened. Sarah set the tray down, poured, turned to leave. "What is your name?" he said. She stopped with her back to him. "Sarah, your Majesty." The silence that followed was long enough to be noticed. "Where are you from originally?" "The eastern reaches, your Majesty." This was the truth. The river had been in the eastern forest. She had been found there. Another silence. "You may go," he said. She walked to the door. His wolf stopped her. Not physically. Nothing so obvious. But she felt it rise up in the room behind her like a wave, like weather, like the pressure change before a storm. She felt it reaching toward her, not aggressively, not hungrily, the way a wolf reaches toward something it has lost and does not understand why. She kept walking. She got through the door, and she kept her spine straight, for all 43 steps, and down the servants' stairwell, and she stopped on the 3rd landing, and pressed both palms against the stone wall, and let herself breathe. Her hands were shaking again. She looked at the scars on her wrists. She thought about a man holding a pen at dawn, signing a paper he did not read closely enough, in a room with high windows where the light came in gray and cold. She thought about someone who had told him lies, and she thought about the look on his wolf's face that she had not seen but had felt completely, the bewilderment and the recognition and the terrible urgent need, and she pressed her forehead against the cool stone and breathed and breathed and breathed. She had not wept in 3 years. She did not weep now, but it was the closest she had come. If you have not yet subscribed to this channel, now is the moment to do it. Hit the button below, turn on the bell, and make sure you never miss a story. New episodes arrive every week, and what happens next in this one is something you do not want to find out from someone else. Chapter 3. The Mark. It was the healer who saw it first. Sarah had been in the north wing nearly 2 months when she turned her ankle on the eastern stairwell. It was a minor thing, the sort of injury that comes from fatigue and an uneven step, and she had been prepared to wrap it herself and say nothing. But Olenna, who noticed everything and said very little, had sent her to the palace healers without asking whether she wanted to go. The healer was a woman of around 60 named Maren. She had the particular unhurried efficiency of someone who has been treating minor injuries for decades and finds them neither interesting nor beneath her. She examined Sarah's ankle, pronounced it a light sprain, and began wrapping it with practiced hands. It was when she reached for the bandage roll above Sarah's shoulder, leaning across to take it from the shelf on the wall, that she paused. Sarah felt her pause. The healer's hands had been moving in their brisk, automatic way, and then they stopped. Not dramatically, not with any sound. They simply went still. Sarah did not move. After a moment, Maren finished wrapping the ankle in silence, tied it off, and straightened. "How long has that been there?" she asked. Her voice was entirely neutral, a professional voice. The voice of a woman who had decided, in the 2-second pause, not to show anything at all. 3 years, Sarah said, as far as I know. Maren looked at her for a long moment. Her eyes were sharp and dark, and the expression in them was something Sarah could not quite read. "You can cover it again," the healer said. She turned back to her shelf. Her hands moved over the organized rows of supplies with precise, economical motions. "Wrap it well," she said. "Rest the ankle tonight. You can return to full duties in 2 days." Sarah pulled her collar back up. She put her feet on the floor. She stood. "Maren," she said. The healer did not turn around. "Go and rest your ankle," Maren said quietly. "There is nothing else to discuss." Sarah went. She spent the 2 days in her room, and she thought about the pause. She thought about what the healer had seen and what the healer's neutral voice had been concealing. She thought about the fact that Maren had not asked a single further question, had not pressed, had deliberately turned away. She thought, Maren knew the Queen. She thought, Maren recognized the mark. She thought, Maren made a choice in that 2-second pause, and the choice she made was silence. Sarah did not know if this was mercy or something more complicated. She rewrapped her collar and waited. The beta's name was Kale. Sarah had seen him in the North Wing corridors before. He was a tall, fair-haired man in his middle 30s, the kind of quietly watchful person who made her instincts suggest she should change her route when he appeared. She had changed her route when he appeared 3 times, out of a caution she had trusted without examining. On the morning of her 3rd day back to duty, she did not change her route in time. She came around the corner from the servants' stairwell into the corridor, and he was there, coming from the opposite direction, and they were 6 feet from each other before she could decide what to do with that. She kept walking, head down, tray level, every muscle doing the work of appearing entirely ordinary. He slowed. She could feel his gaze without meeting it, not the aggressive, assessing stare of someone who suspected her. Something else, something she could not categorize. They passed each other. She walked to the door of the king's chambers and knocked twice and waited, and did not look back. She heard him stop. She heard, behind her, the absence of footsteps that meant a man standing very still in a corridor he had been walking through, having stopped without meaning to. She knocked again. "Come in," She pushed through the door and let it close behind her, and stood for half a second with her eyes shut, very still. Then she crossed to the side table and poured the tea and turned to leave. The king was at the desk again. She walked past him. She was almost to the door. "The window," he said. She stopped. She had already opened the window on the way in. He could see from where he sat that it was open. This was not about the window. She turned. He was looking at her. Not at the tray. Not at the papers on his desk. At her. His face was the controlled, closed expression she had come to know from 43 mornings of careful avoidance. But something underneath it had shifted. Something she could not name and could not afford to examine. Not here. Not with his full attention on her and the door behind her, and nowhere to go. "Yes, Your Majesty," she said. He held her gaze for a long moment. "Nothing," he said. "You may go." She went. She counted the steps this time, all 43. She was aware, the entire length of the corridor, of the sensation of being watched from a direction she had not yet identified, and she did not look back to confirm it, because she was not ready for what she might find. That night, she woke to someone knocking on her door. Not a hard knock. 3 quiet raps, the kind that were trying not to wake the neighboring rooms. She sat up in the dark. She had a knife in her hand before she was fully upright. She did not remember deciding to reach for it. It had been under her pillow since her first night. "Who is it?" "Marin." Sarah held still for a moment, then reached for the small lamp and opened the door. The healer was standing in the corridor, in a plain gray wrap, her hair loose, a lamp in her own hand. She looked at the knife in Sarah's grip without surprise or alarm. "Put that away," she said, "and let me in." Sarah stepped back. Marin came inside and closed the door, and stood looking at her with those sharp, dark eyes, and the carefully measured expression that Sarah was beginning to understand was how this woman looked when she was afraid. "Cale saw it," Marin said. Sarah went still. "He was in the corridor this morning," Marin continued. "Your collar slipped when you raised the tray, only slightly. But Cale has very sharp eyes, and he has been looking at that mark for a long time. He knows exactly what it looks like. He was in the bonding room when the king placed it." Sarah sat down on the edge of the bed, because her legs had made a quiet decision without consulting her. "He's going to tell him," she said. "He already has." The room was very quiet. Sarah set the knife down on the blanket and looked at it. "When?" she asked. "An hour ago," Marin said. "I was there. I was in the corridor on the floor above, and voices carry in this wing at night." Her jaw tightened. "Cale came to the king's chambers. He said only one thing. He said that the new North Wing maid was carrying the queen's mating mark. Still active." The lamp in Marin's hand was very steady. The woman's entire body was disciplined and careful, and underneath all of it she was frightened in a way she was holding on to with both hands. "What did the king say?" Sarah asked. Marin did not answer immediately. "He did not say anything," she said finally. "Not a word. That is why I came to you." She looked at Sarah with an expression that was somewhere between compassion and urgency, and a third thing that Sarah could not name. Because a man who receives that information and goes silent is not a man who has decided to do nothing. He is a man who is deciding what to do, and you need to not be unprepared. Sarah looked at the mark on her shoulder, still covered by her collar. "You knew," she said. "When you saw it in the healing room, you knew." Marin was quiet for a moment. "I attended the Queen before the trial," she said simply. I treated her for a fever the winter before she died. I know what her mark looked like. I know where it sat, and what shape it held. She exhaled. I made a choice in that moment, and I have been hoping it was the right one. Was it? The healer looked at her. That depends, she said, entirely on what happens in the next few hours. She set her lamp down on the small table. I want you to tell me your name, she said. Your full name. Whatever of it you remember. Sarah looked at her. Sarah, she said. Just Sarah. I have had nothing else for 3 years. Marin nodded once, as though this was the answer she had expected. And before 3 years ago? I woke up in a river, Sarah said, with no memory, with these. She held out her wrists. And with that. She touched her collar. And with a name that came to me slowly, over days. Sarah. Nothing more. Marin looked at her wrists for a long time. The woman who died 3 years ago, she said carefully. The woman the king ordered executed. Her name was Seraphine. She was called Sarah by people who loved her. The room was very still. They told him she was a traitor, Marin continued, her voice quiet and level and very deliberate. They produced letters, testimony, intercepted communications. The evidence was substantial. The trial lasted 3 days. She was convicted. A pause. She was taken to the eastern execution grounds at dawn, on the 4th day. She stopped. The execution grounds, Sarah said, are near the eastern forest. Yes. Near the river. Yes. Sarah looked at the lamp flame. It was small and steady, and it threw a warm, limited circle of light that did not reach the corners of the room. Someone put the rope on my wrists, she said. Someone got close enough to put a rope on my wrists. Yes. And then I was in a river. Marin said nothing. Sarah breathed. She breathed for a long time, and she did not speak, and she did not allow herself to feel the full shape of what she was understanding. She kept it at arm's length, just barely, the way you hold a door shut against something that is too large to let fully in. She thought about the healer's words, about evidence that was substantial, about a trial that lasted 3 days, about testimony and letters and intercepted communications, all of which pointed one direction, all of which converged on a single conclusion, all of which had been believed by a man who had no reason to doubt them, except the knowledge of the woman standing before him. She thought about a man at a window at dawn, with his hands flat on the ledge, and his whole body locked. She thought about his wolf going still in the air around her. She thought about the scent of grief. Who? She asked. Marin's expression changed. We don't know, she said quietly. We have suspected for 3 years, but we have no proof. She paused. There are people in this palace who benefited from your disappearance. People who could have constructed the evidence. People with access. Her mouth tightened. We have been careful. We have been slow. Because slow and careful is the only way to move against people with that kind of power. And one misstep ends everything. We, Sarah said. Marin looked at her. Kale, Sarah said. You and Kyle. The healer nodded once. And 1 or 2 others, she said. The people who loved her, who never believed it. Sarah looked at her hands, the scars on her wrists, the faded mark on her shoulder, which was not, according to everything she had just been told, faded because the king was dead. It was faded because she was. Because for 3 years the bond had been trying to maintain itself across the distance of a woman who did not remember she had a mate, and a man who believed his mate had betrayed him and been put in the ground. She stood up. "He is coming," she said. It was not a question. Marin looked at the door. "He was going to wait until morning," she said. "I thought I had time." She paused. But a man who loves someone and goes very quiet is not waiting long. There were footsteps in the corridor outside, not the quick, purposeful sound of a guard, not the hurrying sound of a servant. Slow, even deliberate footsteps. The sound of a man who has made up his mind and is now simply closing the distance. They stopped outside the door. Silence. Then one knock. Not 3 quiet raps. Not the official summons of a king. One knock, slow and firm, with the weight of a full hand behind it. Marin stepped back against the far wall. Sarah looked at the door. She thought about the discipline she had built. The 3 years of careful unknowing. The small, functional life, constructed from materials that could not be confiscated. She thought about the compass and the palace and north. She crossed the room and opened the door. He was alone. No guards. No beta. No court. Just the king, standing in the narrow servants' corridor in plain, dark clothing. A lamp held at his side that he had clearly taken from a wall bracket somewhere, rather than sent anyone to fetch for him. He was taller than she had registered from 43 mornings of careful avoidance. Broader. He looked like a man who had been awake for some time, and there was something in his face she had no reference for. An expression she had never seen on him, because she had never let herself look at his face directly. She had been right to be careful about it. He was looking at her now, not at her collar, not at her wrists, at her face. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he is trying to verify, his whole attention focused, all the composure stripped back to something underneath that had no practice in being seen. Neither of them spoke. After a moment, he held the lamp up slightly, and she did not move. She let him look, because this was the thing she had been building toward for 6 weeks, without knowing she was doing it. This was the moment she had been pointing at since the river. This was North. He said her name, not Sarah. Seraphine. His voice was low and completely wrecked and absolutely certain. She reached up and pulled her collar aside. She heard him exhale. It was not a controlled sound. It was the sound of something that had been held for a very long time, finding, all at once, nowhere to go. He raised his free hand, and she held still, and he pressed 2 fingers very gently against the mark on her shoulder, and the moment he touched it, the bond came alive under her skin with the force of something that had been waiting in the dark for 3 years. She felt his wolf. She felt it the way she had felt it in the corridor for 6 weeks. The pressure change, the weight of something large going still. But it was not still now. It was reaching toward her through every possible inch of the bond they shared, massive and certain, and completely broken open with recognition. She thought, mine. She did not know if it was her thought, or the wolf's, or if, after 3 years, there was any difference left. "You're alive," he said. "I am," she said. His hand was still against her shoulder, and he was still looking at her face, and whatever composure he had carried into this corridor was gone, simply gone, replaced with something she did not have a word for, because it was too large for any single word she owned. "I thought," he said, and stopped. "I know," she said. His jaw worked once. His eyes were extraordinarily dark. "I signed it," he said. Not an accusation, not a justification, just a fact he needed to say to her face. "I know," she said. "I believed them." His voice was low and the rawness in it was absolute. "They told me. And I believed it, and I signed it, and I did not look at your face. Evander. He went still at the sound of his name in her voice. I woke up in a river, she said. I have spent 3 years not knowing who I was. I do not know everything yet. But I know that I am standing here, and you are standing here. And that means someone wanted both of us to believe something that was not true. He was breathing carefully. Controlled, deliberate breaths. The only composure left to him. Who? He said. I don't know yet. She looked at him steadily. But Maren and Cale have been working on it for 3 years. And I think, now that I am here, we are going to find out. His gaze moved to Maren behind her, back to Sarah. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he crossed the distance between them and wrapped his arms around her, and she felt every carefully maintained thing inside her come loose at once. She pressed her forehead to his chest. She felt his chin come down against her hair. She felt his heart, loud and fast, against her ear. He was shaking. She had not expected that. She had not expected that this enormous, composed, controlled man would simply come apart in a servant's corridor, with his face pressed into her hair, and his arms locked around her. She had not expected that his grief would sound like this, like relief and self-accusation, and 3 years of held breath, all releasing simultaneously into the dark of the narrow corridor. She held on to him. She held on to him because her legs had made their quiet decision again, and because the bond was burning through her like warmth through a cold body, and because whatever she had been before the river, whoever she was now, this was north, and she had arrived. She was shaking too. It was all right. There was no one watching but Maren, and Maren had turned her face toward the wall, with the particular tact of someone who understood that some things were not meant for witnesses. They sat in the room for a long time. Evander on the chair, Sarah on the bed, Maren in the corner, quiet and present in the way of someone who understands their function in a given moment. He listened to everything she knew. The river, the waking with nothing, 3 years of building a small life from the materials available, the compass pointing north. He did not speak while she told it. He sat with his hands on his knees, and his face entirely open in the way that it had never been, through all the 43 mornings she had counted her steps past his door. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "There was a man named Aldrich." She waited. "He was my father's closest adviser," Evander said. "He moved to my court when I took the throne. He was trusted. His jaw was tight. He was the one who brought me the first evidence. He directed the investigation. He presented the trial testimony." He paused. "He has been the most vocal, in the years since, about the importance of keeping your death as a fact. Every time someone in the court expressed doubt, it was Aldrich who dismissed it." He looked at his hands. "He has also been expanding his position significantly since you died. Land, access, influence." His voice was very flat and quiet, the flatness of something that has gone all the way past fury into cold. Things he would not have been able to consolidate had you remained queen. "That is a motive," Maren said from the corner. "It is not evidence," Evander said. "No," she agreed, "but it is a place to begin." He looked up. His gaze moved between them, the healer who had spent 3 years on slow, careful work, and the wife who had come back from a river with nothing but a compass. "I need to think," he said. "I need to think carefully about how to proceed." He paused. He cannot know you have been found. If he knows, and he has allies, he will act before I can." Sarah looked at him. "So, I remain a maid," she said. He looked at her. "For now," he said, and the weight in those 2 words was everything he was not saying, a whole landscape of things he could not yet afford to say. "For now," she agreed. He stood. He stood the way he always stood in the chambers she brought tea to every morning, with the composure fully back in place, all the grief and the openness secured somewhere she could no longer see. Only now she knew it was there. Only now she knew what he was holding. He crossed to the door. He stopped. He turned and looked at her with his hand on the frame, and whatever he saw in her face made something in his own face move. 43 steps, he said quietly. Every morning. I counted them too. She stared at him. "From the window," he said. "I counted the steps you took when you left." His eyes held hers. I did not know why I could not stop doing it. He held her gaze for one more moment. Then he walked out into the corridor, and she heard his footsteps going away, slow and even. And she sat in the lamplight with Maren in the corner, and she put her face in her hands, and she did not weep. She breathed. She breathed for a long time, and she let herself feel, for the first time in 3 years, the specific feeling of being known. The following days were the most difficult kind of difficult there is. Not the kind made of active disaster, of running and hiding and immediate danger. The kind made of normalcy stretched over something enormous, of performing the ordinary life, while the truth sits in the room with you. Sarah brought the tea. She opened the windows. She walked the 43 steps. She did not look at his face in the mornings, not because she was hiding from it anymore, because she had looked at it once, properly, in the doorway of her room in the small hours, and she had understood that if she looked at it in the daylight with other people present, she would not be able to maintain the face that was keeping her safe. He understood this without being told. In the mornings, he stayed at his desk. He did not look up. He gave the small, neutral acknowledgments he had always given, and she responded in kind, and neither of them gave away a single thing. In the evenings, Cale came to her room. He came alone, without announcement the first time, and stood in her doorway with a look on his face that was somewhere between grief and gratitude, and something she could not entirely interpret. "I knew her," he said. "I was there from the beginning. I watched them fall in love. I was at the bonding ceremony." He paused. "I spent 3 years telling myself she was gone, and trying to find the person who did it. And then I saw your collar move in the corridor, and I thought I was going mad." Sarah looked at him. "You're not going mad," she said. He exhaled. "No," he said. "I am not." He came back the following evening, and the one after that, and he brought what he had spent 3 years carefully, slowly accumulating. Documents, witness accounts, small and careful, from servants who had seen things, and kept quiet because they valued their continued existence. Letters that did not align with the official record. Small, individual threads, none of them enough alone, each of them pointing the same direction. Aldrich. The more she read, the clearer the shape became. A man who had spent years close to power, waiting for his opportunity. A queen who had been too observant, who had noticed his reach extending in ways that should have required her permission, who had been quietly, carefully documenting inconsistencies. A man who had known the documentation existed and moved before she could act on it. He had not wanted her gone because he hated her. He had wanted her gone because she was the only person in the palace with both the access and the inclination to catch him. She thought about the irony of that for a long time. She was still thinking about it when Evander knocked on her door on the 7th evening. He came in and sat in the chair and looked at the papers spread on the small table. He looked at them for a long time without speaking. Then he picked up the letter Cale had brought 2 nights before, the one with Aldrich's seal and a date that contradicted his testimony at the trial. His thumb traced the seal. "How much more do you need?" Sarah asked. "This is enough," he said. His voice was very flat. "Enough to move?" "Enough to move carefully," he said. "Carefully is the only way." He set the letter down. "If I act in anger, he will say I am acting out of grief, that a man trying to recover his dead wife is not thinking clearly." His mouth tightened. "I need it to be undeniable. I need it to be public and complete and impossible to argue with." Sarah looked at him. "He has been sitting in your council for 3 years, she said. "Yes." "Knowing what he did?" "Yes." "Watching you grieve?" Evander looked at the wall. "Yes," he said, and the word had very little left in it. She reached across the small table and put her hand over his. He went still. He looked down at her hand on his. After a long moment, he turned his hand over and held hers. Neither of them said anything. The lamp burned between them, and the palace was quiet outside the door, and they sat there in the small, private circle of light, with 3 years of everything that had happened between them present in the room, and neither of them tried to talk it into something smaller than it was. Aldrich did not know he was already finished. He was a careful man, and he had been careful for 3 years, and there was nothing about the North Wing maid that triggered his alertness. She was beneath his notice. She was precisely where she was supposed to be. This was the advantage of being invisible. Sarah understood it now, more fully than she had when invisibility was simply a survival strategy. She had built a weapon out of being overlooked, without knowing that was what she was building. It took 8 more days to gather the final piece. It was Marin who found it, in the end. A servant who had been reassigned to the far northern estates immediately after the Queen's trial, and had spent 3 years in quiet exile for knowing too much. A servant who, when Marin wrote to her carefully, through a chain of trusted intermediaries, wrote back. She had witnessed Aldrich bribing the investigation's lead recorder. She had a letter. She had kept it for 3 years, in the way that frightened people keep things, not because she intended to use it, but because she was too afraid to destroy it. She sent it with the return courier. Evander read it at his desk on a Tuesday morning, with the gray light coming through the east windows, and the tea growing cold beside his papers. When Sarah came to collect the tray, he did not look up, but he said, very quietly, so that it would not carry past the door, "Tonight." She picked up the tray. "Tonight," she agreed. She walked the 43 steps. She did not count them. The council met in the great hall 2 hours after sunset, summoned without explanation at the king's order. 43 of them, the full inner council. They came in various states of preparedness, some clearly pulled from dinner, some from beds, all of them wearing the careful, neutral expressions of people trying to read the king's face before he showed his hand. Aldrich came in near the middle of the group, composed as always. His expression, Cale reported afterward, had been one of measured concern, the kind of concern a trusted advisor shows when his king calls an unscheduled meeting, the kind of concern that is also underneath alert. He was already looking for the angle. He was still looking for it when Evander walked in. The king entered alone, which was unusual. No guard, no beta following at his right hand. He came in with his hands at his sides, and his expression entirely closed, and took his place at the head of the table, and looked at the assembled council. He said, "I have discovered that my queen was innocent." The room went very still. "I have in my possession," he continued, his voice level and quiet in the way it always was when he was controlling something enormous, "evidence that the investigation into the alleged treason was manufactured, that the testimony presented at trial was purchased, that the entire case against Queen Seraphine was constructed by a member of this council, with access to both the investigation and the recorder." He let that sit for a moment. "I also have a witness," he said, "a direct witness to the bribery, who will stand before this council and state what she saw." He looked at Aldrich. Aldrich's composure was extraordinary. He had it for a full 5 seconds before it cracked. "Your Majesty," he began. "I have not yet asked you to speak," Evander said. The room was completely silent. "I also have," Evander said, "one additional piece of evidence." He turned toward the side door. The side door opened. Sarah walked in. She had spent the afternoon with Marin, who had been brisk and practical, and had said very little, while her hands arranged Sarah's hair, and settled a plain gown on her shoulders, and touched for a moment the collar, before adjusting it to show exactly what it needed to show. Marin's eyes had been bright, with something she did not call by name. Sarah walked through the door and into the great hall, and 43 council members looked at her. She looked at none of them. She walked to Evander's side. She stopped beside him. He looked at her once, just once, and the expression on his face was the one she had seen in the doorway of her room at 2 a.m, the one with all the composure stripped away. Then he looked back at the council. "My queen," he said, "is alive." The hall erupted. She stood still in the middle of it, and let it happen around her. Voices, movement, the sound of a large room of powerful people, all processing the same impossible information at the same moment. She watched Aldrich's face go through its sequence: shock, calculation, denial, and finally the particular blankness of a man who has understood that the move he is trying to find does not exist. There was no move left. She had spent 3 years invisible, and now she was standing in the full light of the great hall, with the mating mark visible on her shoulder, and the king beside her, and 43 witnesses, and there was nothing he could do with any of it, except exactly what he was doing, which was standing very still, while the room came apart around him, and the door behind him was quietly and thoroughly blocked by the palace guard. Cale stepped forward from the far end of the table. He laid the evidence on the surface. Every piece, in sequence, building the case the way it had been built over 3 years. Slow, careful, irrefutable. Aldrich said nothing. He had nothing to say. Epilogue. The trial took 2 weeks. It was thorough and public, and the evidence was presented in full, and at the end of it the verdict was the only verdict the evidence permitted. Aldrich was convicted of treason, of conspiracy, of falsifying royal judicial proceedings, and of the attempted murder of the Queen. The sentencing was carried out a week after. Sarah did not attend the sentencing. She had been asked if she wanted to, and she had thought about it honestly, and decided she did not. She had nothing she needed to see there. The truth had been established in front of 43 witnesses and entered into the permanent record, and that was what she had come back for. She did not need to watch the end of it. She spent that morning instead in the healer's quarters with Marin, who was making tea and being entirely ordinary about it, in the way she was ordinary about most things, and who did not mention the sentencing happening 3 floors below, and who simply talked about the herb garden she was planning to expand in spring. Sarah sat with her hands around a warm cup and thought about spring gardens, and let the morning be what it was. The recovery of herself was slow. She had expected that. 3 years was a long time, and the things that had been lost were not all recoverable. There were gaps that would remain gaps, faces she could not recall, conversations that were gone, the particular texture of small daily things, the feeling of moving through her own life before the river, that was gone and would not come back. She made her peace with this. She had been making her peace with things for 3 years. She was, by now, reasonably good at it. What came back was not the memories. It was the self. Not all at once. Slowly, in the way that things come back when you stop forcing them. The way sleep comes when you stop trying to sleep. A sense of her own instincts. A recognition of her own thinking. The feeling, which she had missed without knowing she was missing it, of trusting herself. She recognized the woman she was becoming. Not from memory, not from anyone else's description. From the inside, that was enough. Evander was patient in a way that she had not expected, and that she would not have been able to explain to anyone who had not seen him in the great hall, with his composure stripped away. He did not rush her. He did not ask for things she was not yet ready to give. He was simply present, in the way of someone who had learned something essential about patience through 3 years of the alternative, and who understood now that the only thing worse than waiting was not waiting. They talked, in the evenings, not about the past, or not only about the past, about ordinary things, about the council and the forthcoming governance questions, and his opinions on the Eastern trade agreements, which she found, to her mild surprise, that she also had opinions about the herb garden Marin was planning, about the bond. The bond was the most complicated thing to navigate. It had been alive and dysregulated and functioning without either of them for 3 years. Coming back into it properly, with both of them present and aware, was not a simple business. There were moments when it overwhelmed her, the sheer breadth of it, the depth, the specific feeling of someone else's emotional landscape open to her. She had lived alone inside herself for so long that the presence of another person, the constant warmth of another consciousness at the edge of hers, sometimes stopped her mid-step and required her to breathe through it. She told him this. He looked at her with something careful and honest in his expression. "I feel it too," he said. "The presence of you." A pause. I had spent so long without it that I had stopped registering the absence as an absence. I had just come to understand the silence as the way things were. He looked at his hands. "And then you came into the north wing," he said, "and my wolf went strange, and there was something in the air that was not an absence anymore, and I kept telling myself it was nothing." "You counted the steps," she said. He looked at her. "I counted the steps," he said. She reached for his hand. He took it. She thought about the 43 steps. She thought about a compass pointing north, and a woman who had followed it through 3 years of careful, deliberate survival. to arrive at a door she had already known how to open. She thought about what it means to be found. Not rescued. Found. The specific thing that happens when you have been traveling in a direction without knowing why, and then you arrive, and you understand that the direction was always this, that the knowing was always there, below the words, below the memory, in the bedrock of what you are. She had built herself out of what remained. She was beginning to understand, not so different from what she had been before. The river had taken her memories. It had not taken herself. On a morning in early spring, Evander came to the North Wing corridor, not to walk it, not for any official purpose. He simply came and stood at one end of it and looked down its length. Sarah was coming up the servants' stairwell when she saw him there. She stopped on the top step. He turned. He was dressed for council, which made his presence in the servants' corridor, looking at the carpet and the distance between the stairwell and his oak door, slightly absurd. She looked at him. 43, she said. 43, he agreed. She walked the corridor. She passed him. She kept walking until she reached his door. She knocked twice. She waited. She heard him smile before she heard him move. "Come in," he said. She pushed the door open. The east windows were full of morning light. Real light. The kind that had gathered enough warmth to mean something. The fire was not needed anymore. She stepped inside. She left the door open behind her. She turned to face him as he came through it. He stopped in front of her and looked at her face the way he had looked at it in the corridor doorway, with all the composure set aside, and she let him look, because she was done being careful about this. She was done counting the steps between herself and North. He raised his hand and set his palm against her face, and she pressed into it and closed her eyes. "I have you," he said, quietly and completely certain. She thought about a dream, and a voice saying a name that was hers, and the feeling of being held the way a person holds something they are terrified to lose. "Yes," she said. She opened her eyes. Outside the east windows, the palace grounds were coming into bud, small and persistent and furiously alive, the way small things are in spring, when they have survived what winter demanded. She held his gaze and felt the bond, warm and whole and entirely awake, and she thought, this is what North looks like. This is what it feels like to arrive. If this story reached something in you, if you stayed until the very last step, this channel has a new story waiting every week, and every one of them is built to keep you awake far past when you plan to stop watching. Subscribe, turn on the bell, and we will see you for the next one.